see that the agri or the food systems is in an interesting time. Yeah, so we think it's a combination of different crises. Yeah, we see that there is the Ukraine impact of the war, which has put it certainly on top of every newspaper here in this part of the world. But there's still some ramifications of the pandemic. There is still some supply chains, like you said, that are not fully functional. And let's face it, climate change is here. So the effects of it are hitting this industry big. And I think people see that due to all this, there is, like you said, supply chain disruptions and market variability. So when you look into agriculture and climate change, yes, this is an industry that contributes to more than 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a lot. As companies, there was just a consumer goods forum recently where top consumer food companies said it's one of their #1 priorities is to look into product carbon footprint, and then they see, oh, oops, a lot of that product carbon footprint is due to agriculture because the inputs you put into your manufacturing process. So reducing it has effects on the climate, but also has effects on how our customers look at it. Yeah. The interesting part is, yes, you have emissions coming from fuel usage, you have emissions from deforestations, you have emissions from, maybe transportation related to it, but you can also be a net sink. So if you go to sustainable agricultural practices, you can be carbon positive, and there is a market opening up for what is called carbon credits. So if as a farmer you apply certain practices and you can prove that you're putting CO2 back into the soil, so to say, so you're absorbing, then you can record that, take the data and sell it. And first companies are establishing schemas to pay you for it. So that's a motivation on top of your, want to do a good job and be a good human being. It's a monetary incentive that is developing. Yeah? But I think whether you see it for a monetary aspect or you see it because like the Italian farmers that just don't grow rice, it's just not growing, things need to change. So people are looking for new practices and are interested in what needs to happen. And data obviously can play a big role in that. So then the war in Ukraine, we talked about it. I learned a new word in English language, the breadbasket of Europe. So in German, we call it the corn chamber. That's what I learned in my childhood years in school. But it probably wasn't so known. I talked to some US colleagues who said, oh, we thought we're still exporting to the Soviet Union countries, but it's actually the other way around. They're exporting into a lot of parts. So if you look at sunflower, wheat, there is a shortage, and to the point that the United Nations, the Monetary Fund have declared a serious crisis that certain countries could be having starving populations soon. And if you look at business, there was disruption in supply chains. Shipping prices went up, and you mentioned fuel crisis. So fertilizer, at least the nitrogen-based fertilizer, is linked to the price of gas. So that went up, and because a lot of fertilizer comes from Russia and is under sanctions or can't get out, then you see that the prices are really going up, and there is a fear that there's not enough fertilizer for the next harvest year. So this is serious, and people see that with sanctions and risks, there is a need to diversify, to better look into your supply chains, understand, am I under risk or not? And what used to be cheap and good is now no longer safe. Yeah. And you see here the -2% macroeconomic impact. We probably need to watch that figure. We did this back in April. when I look at inflation, as I mentioned, it's very high. So it's on people's radar, and you mentioned revolution, or at least people being very sensitive to it.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
It's so what we think is that agribusinesses, food companies, and also governments will put a much bigger focus on resilience. So there is a need to look, how can I mitigate, how can I understand, how can I prepare myself, and that undoubtedly needs to systems, and we as SAP think we're very, very well placed to play our share, especially knowing that in the ag industry, in the consumer products industry, in retail, we have a super customer base. So almost all of the Fortune 500s run SAP, so there is a lot we think we can do to help them. When we look at what is our market, or how do we define it, we've developed this picture to say we look at the entire value chain, so from farm to consumer, starting with the input providers, which is chemicals, ag chemicals, seed, fertilizer, crop protection, machinery companies, and we also distinguish crops, so things growing in the soil and livestock, the animal side, and you could argue that animal feed and medicine or supplements are the equivalent on the input side. So we really need input because there's a lot of innovation happening in the growth process. And we really start our process now, which is new, with agricultural production and farming. We then go into origination, so buying from farmers, storing, maybe first processing, but then really selling it out either domestically, internationally for processing, and then on into the food industry.